Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So in this video I want to cover what statistics should you focus on as a damage dealer. What should you prioritize to maximize your output in damage? These stats come from a whole lot of different sources. First of all, you're going to try and get your ratings up, and then you're going to try get your total score up. Your ratings, when they are green or even red, they will give the maximum amount of stats. You can tooltip them and you can see if you're wasting any stats. If they're red, you are, and they can give a maximum of 50% contributed to your total. In order to get these ratings, you'll want to get particular gear pieces with those, enchantments, artifacts, mount equip bonuses, mount insignias and bonuses, companion gear, armor kits and jewels, and all sorts of different buffs. However, when you're still building up your character, you're not going to be able to maximize everything. So what should you focus on for the best benefit? Well, to put it simply, this. Some of them you're not even going to see on your stat page, like damage buffs and damage debuffs. But in the number one spot for contributing to the most amount of damage is going to be that physical or magical damage boost, and you see that way down the bottom of your character sheet just here. Now the only way to obtain this is through ability scores, choosing strength for physical damage boost or intelligence for magical damage boost. So depending on what type of damage dealer you are, you want to focus on either or. As a rogue, we're a physical damage dealer, so we try and get as best we can those ability score points. Now, as with all of this, there are some grey areas. For example, you might think I should take a neck and waist set here that would give me more strength. Here it's just giving me 6 intelligence. Why wouldn't I get a strength one instead? Well, because of the bonus it's going to provide, and that bonus actually results in more damage than just getting something with strength. When you actually look at, let's say, the math of this, you can see that when you're at 45% of all of these stats, how much adding 10% would contribute. But the thing is with this physical and magical damage boost is you can't get a whole lot of it. So it's not exactly like the effect will be diminished overall. You can probably push to 10% at best. But if you are to compare it to other sources of damage, you can see that those top ones here do all average out to be equal. It's just the more you have of a damage increasing stat, the less effective it is. So power at like 90%, when we add 10% to that, it's going to be a lot less than if you were to add 10% to like a 6.3%. Now what you can use is this tool right here that I'm going to have linked in the video description below to exactly see what I mean by that. This is the damage formula up here, but here is where we can see the interesting damage gain to compare. So if we're at like 80% power, and we're going to compare that versus having 90% power, you can see the overall damage gain would be only 5.56%. That versus when I add 10% onto 45%, it would be a 6.9% gain. Versus at 0% and adding 10% would equal 10%. So the more you have of it, the less effective it is, and that is why strength and intelligence is so good, because going from 0% to 10% is that 10% gain. You have so little of it, so any amount you can get is really beneficial. But from there we have damage debuffs and damage buffs. These are not shown on your character sheet at all. But damage buffs will be things like when we leave stealth, we gain 10% damage for 5 seconds. A damage debuff would be you increase the target's damage taken by physical attacks for 10 seconds. These two bonuses add separately to each other. But again, similar to like the strength and intelligence, the more you have, the less effective it is. So if we were to have like 100% debuffs and add like a 10% to that, you can see it would only be a 5% gain. Versus if we're at 45% and add 10%, it would be a 6.9%, which is exactly equal to what we'd get with like the physical and magical damage boost at that level of 45%. The same with power combat advantage. They're all at that same level. The more you have, the less effective it is. But the thing is, it's not that easy to get so many damage buffs. It's not that easy to get so many debuffs. So that's why they are more impactful versus these main stats here. Now with those main stats, you can see the priority is power, then combat advantage, then forte, then critical severity and critical strike. They're pretty much equal. And then accuracy. Now all of these stats diminish as you gain more, except accuracy. It's a little bit weird. The more accuracy you have, the more effective it is overall. But that doesn't mean it's better to stack versus the other stats. Just focus on those, and lastly, accuracy. Just be aware of the balance. You don't want to stack one stat way above the others. For example, if my power is at 80% and everything else is at like 45%, I'm far better off adding 10% to my combat advantage versus adding 10% to my power. Because the more you have, the less effective it is. So again, when building up your character, you generally want to keep a balance between power and combat advantage, as they will result in the same amount of overall damage gain, again being diminished the more you get. It's just that combat advantage will rely on you to flank your enemy. You will have to have an ally positioned on the opposite side of you. Or you just be a rogue and you go into stealth here and you'll gain combat advantage against everything, but that's only going to be for like one hit of your encounter powers and then that's broken. So you can't rely on that in a boss fight. That's why you position for flanking, and once you have that, then combat advantage becomes equal to your power. Again, you can use this tool here to exactly compare, like for example, we're at 45% power and we were, let's say, to add 10% here, so we'd bet 55%, or we were to add 10% to our combat advantage, we would see that it's exactly equal if we added either side. Adding 10% to combat advantage is equal to adding 10% to power, as long as they're at the same kind of values. So when you are choosing gear, you're choosing companion bonuses, choosing what ratings to get. Focus on this priority list. Just be aware though, don't take something that's going to have drastically less bonus than something else. For example, if the decision is to get 5,000 power or 10,000 critical strike, you would go with the 10,000 critical strike. Unless, of course, it would max you out. Same with the percentages. You would go with something that would give you like 10% critical strike versus 5% power. Generally, more is better. Whatever is going to give you more of the stats, the better. Or more of the damage bonus. If you're tied between power and a damage bonus, if one is 3% and the other is 3%, take the damage bonus. But if power bonus is 6% versus the damage bonus of 3%, take the power. The main source of these total percentages, once you have got the ratings to max, is from gear, all the bonuses. So when you're choosing what gear you should be using, choose gear that's going to give you bonuses to these stats and bonuses to damage. There are some exceptions, like the Band of Air. You can't really understand how well it's going to perform, so that requires testing, and you can check people's builds. Do they use this piece of equipment that has some weird bonus? Like, it says it's going to deal damage, but how much? That requires people and players to go and actually test that. For a rogue right now, it is very good. And then companions, they're a big bonus to these stats as well. Again, just try and get ones that focus on these stats. I can't tell you exactly which ones because that changes over time, and also people inflate certain prices, so one will be more expensive than another. So it's better for you to understand what's going on. What's behind the decision making of me just choosing what's better. And it's all around this math and this formula. You can use this little toolkit here, compare different gear pieces, different bonuses they're going to provide you, different equipment, and ultimately discern and figure it out for yourself. You can just copy and paste what other people use, but that's usually always more expensive than figuring out alternatives for yourself. So after focusing on these stats, you could turn to getting item level, recharge speed, and action points. Item level is listed here not in a rank, and the reason is because like 90% of the content is scaled, meaning it's going to set you at a certain item level regardless of how much you actually have, and that is going to set your base damage and your hit points. So that is why there is no point in trying to stack item level. There is no point going out of your way to get as much as possible, unless you're in endgame. But even then, you want to make sure you're focusing your stats first, and then the item level. But there is somewhat of a balance to that, and that is again where you can use this tool. If you're looking at a piece of gear that maybe only has 600 item level versus a piece of gear that has 2000, but then it has a bonus that is, let's say, better on the lower item level than one at the higher item level, you need to plug that in here and you need to figure out which is better. For example, if you want to look at the Mirage weapon set, it has like 3000 item level less, so I'd be only at like 87,000 item level, but the overall damage of the Mirage weapons can be like 15% on my class, so that can be well worth it. But of course we need to include the bonus that other weapon set is going to give us. Let's say, for example, this one weapon set is going to give us 20% more accuracy, whereas this other weapon set would give us 15% overall damage. Then you can see it's better to get the one that's got the 15% overall damage versus the one that's going to give us 20% accuracy. So you really have to, use that to figure out what is better. And that is the whole part of min-maxing your damage and making a good build. Figuring out what's best mathematically, and then going in game and testing it. You can of course just go in game and equip those items and figure it out and see, does it seem like I'm doing better damage with this or worse damage with this in certain content. It just can be very hard because you'd have to run the same content over and over. You'd have to play the mechanics exactly the same each time, which is pretty impossible. Play with the exact same players and have them play exactly the same every time, which is even more impossible. So it's very, very hard to get consistent, accurate results without just looking at the math and then having a look, does that correlate to how you feel and see in game. You would use like just this log here. Have a look at your hits. Are they equating to more damage or less? Does it match the increase you would see here? Keep in mind again, this is the average increase, the average damage done, the average based on your critical strike, the average based on your accuracy. At 90% accuracy, it's the equivalent of enemies not deflecting at all. At 100% crit strike chance, that would be, yes, you always critically hitting. That's impossible to get statistically, but if you want to get rid of, let's say, that average damage and see what you would be hitting for, like this 3000 magnitude power should hit for 3.856 million damage with these exact stats on a critical hit. Without a critical hit, it would hit for that much. Anyway, it's a lot to explain, and at least I hope this short breakdown here will help you out on what to stack. Once you've got all those bonuses and the priority, you can go and get like recharge speed and action point gain. Again, it's all a balancing act. If something's going to give us 20% recharge speed versus 5% of these stats, even though they're ranked at the highest, it can be better to get that 20% recharge speed, depending on the class. It's not set in stone. Just because damage buffs are higher than accuracy doesn't mean you should always take the damage buffs. If it's going to be a 5% damage buff versus 20% accuracy, take the accuracy. It's going to have higher gains if it's that big of a difference. When it's equal, 10% of each, then you can see this is how it ranks. Again, don't be afraid to use this tool and mess around and figure out how things match up, what gains and losses you would get from certain gear pieces. Keep in mind, you will not be able to edit this directly. You will have to go and download it. Then you will have to upload it or open it with Excel to be able to edit. Once you understand all this, you will most definitely be able to improve your damage based on this understanding and knowing how to build your character. It'll also save you a ton of astral diamonds. You will realize quickly that getting that +1 version of that mastercraft item, which is only going to give you 100 item level, will result in next to no gain. And if you're scaled, 0 gain. So a special thank you to all these channel members for their added support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.